Have you ever felt emotionally drained after spending time with certain friends? Have you noticed that some people in your circles seem to create drama wherever they go, yet you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong? What if I told you that Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, discovered specific patterns that reveal when someone is psychologically toxic to your well-being? Jung understood something that most people never realize. The greatest danger to your mental health doesn't come from obvious enemies or declared adversaries. It comes from people who are unconscious of their own psychological patterns, people who drain your energy, manipulate your emotions, and distort your reality without even knowing they're doing it. Today, we're going to explore Jung's insights about the hidden psychological dynamics that make certain friendships toxic. But here's the uncomfortable truth. These patterns are so subtle, so cleverly disguised as normal social behavior, that you might be tolerating psychological abuse while thinking you're just being a good friend. Jung wrote extensively about how unconscious people project their inner conflicts onto others, turning relationships into battlegrounds for unresolved psychological material. He understood that some individuals, without conscious malice, can become psychological parasites who feed off your energy, stability, and peace of mind. This isn't about judging people or becoming paranoid about relationships. This is about developing the psychological awareness to protect your mental sovereignty. Jung believed that your primary responsibility is individuation, becoming who you truly are, and toxic friendships are one of the greatest obstacles to this process. Are you ready to discover the secret signs that Jung identified? Are you prepared to see your relationships through the lens of psychological truth rather than social nicety? Let's dive into the hidden world of unconscious manipulation and learn to recognize the types of people who are psychologically dangerous to be around. The energy vampire, the chronic victim. The first type Jung would warn you about is what we might call the energy vampire, someone who consistently positions themselves as the victim in every situation. Jung understood that while genuine victimization exists, there are individuals who have made victimhood their identity, their source of power, and their way of controlling others. This person always has a crisis, always has drama, always needs your help, your advice, your emotional support. But here's the pattern Jung would have you notice. No matter how much you help, the problems never get resolved. In fact, they often get worse, and new crises mysteriously appear just when you think things are improving. Jung called this the negative mother complex in action, a psychological pattern where someone remains stuck in a state of helpless dependency, unconsciously recreating situations that confirm their victim identity. They don't want solutions, they want sympathy. They don't want to grow, they want to be rescued. What makes this so insidious is that they're not consciously manipulating you. They genuinely believe they're the victim of circumstances, bad luck, or other people's behavior. But Jung understood that this chronic victimhood serves a psychological function. It allows them to avoid taking responsibility for their life while maintaining a constant source of emotional supply from others. The energy vampire creates what Jung called psychological inflation in those around them. You start to feel like you're their savior, their therapist, their emotional anchor. This feels meaningful at first. You're helping someone, being a good friend, but gradually you realize that you're being drained. Your own problems start to feel insignificant compared to their constant crises. Here's how to recognize this pattern. Pay attention to the emotional state you're in after spending time with this person. Do you feel energized and uplifted, or do you feel exhausted and depleted? A healthy friendship should be reciprocal. Sometimes you support them, sometimes they support you. But with an energy vampire, the flow is always one-directional. Jung would also have you notice their response to your own problems. When you try to share your struggles, do they listen and offer genuine support? Or do they quickly redirect the conversation back to their own issues? Often they'll use your problems as a launching pad to talk about how much worse their situation is. The most telling sign is their relationship with solutions. Present them with practical advice and watch what happens. They'll have excuses for why nothing will work. They'll explain why their situation is different, more complicated, more hopeless than anything you understand. This isn't stupidity. It's unconscious sabotage. Solutions threaten their victim identity. The shadow projector, the constant critic. The second type that Jung would have you be wary of is the shadow projector, someone who cannot tolerate their own psychological darkness and instead projects it onto everyone around them. Jung spent years studying the shadow, that part of the psyche containing everything we've rejected about ourselves, and he understood that unintegrated shadow material becomes toxic to relationships. This person has an opinion about everything you do, and it's rarely positive. They're quick to point out your flaws, your mistakes, your shortcomings. They position themselves as the voice of reason, the truth teller, the one who cares enough to be honest. But Jung would help you see that their criticism says far more about them than it does about you. The shadow projector cannot tolerate their own imperfections, so they unconsciously project these qualities onto others and attack them there. If they're struggling with feelings of inadequacy, they'll constantly criticize your achievements. If they're dealing with repressed anger, they'll accuse you of being hostile or aggressive when you're simply being assertive. Jung called this psychological blindness, the inability to see in ourselves what we clearly see in others. The shadow projector is typically unaware that they're projecting. They genuinely believe that the problem lies with you, with other people, with the world. They've become addicted to the temporary relief that comes from locating their psychological pain outside themselves. What makes this particularly damaging is that they often have keen psychological insight, but only when it comes to others. They can accurately identify weaknesses, insecurities, and patterns in everyone except themselves. This makes their criticism feel valid and insightful, which is why it can be so psychologically devastating. Here's how Jung would have you recognize this pattern. Notice whether their feedback is constructive or destructive. Constructive criticism comes from a place of genuine care and includes suggestions for improvement. Destructive criticism comes from a place of psychological projection and focuses on tearing down rather than building up. Pay attention to their emotional investment in your flaws. A true friend might point out a blind spot once or twice, then let you make your own choices. But a shadow projector becomes emotionally invested in your problems. They bring up your past mistakes repeatedly. They seem to take pleasure in your struggles or setbacks. Also notice their own relationship with criticism. When you attempt to give them feedback, even gentle, well-intentioned feedback, how do they respond? Shadow projectors typically cannot tolerate having their own flaws pointed out. They become defensive, angry, or dismissive. They can dish it out, but can't take it. Jung understood that healthy relationships require mutual accountability and honest feedback. But there's a difference between a friend who occasionally offers difficult truths and someone who has made criticizing you their hobby. The shadow projector isn't trying to help you grow. They're trying to manage their own psychological discomfort by projecting it onto you. The persona addict, the performative friend. The third type Jung would warn you about is the persona addict, someone who has become so identified with their social mask that they've lost touch with their authentic self, and they expect you to participate in their performance. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the social face we wear to navigate the world, and he understood that while some persona is necessary, over-identification with it becomes pathological. This person is always on. They're always performing, always maintaining an image, always concerned with how things look rather than how things actually are. Their friendships aren't genuine connections between authentic selves. They're collaborations in maintaining mutual illusions. The persona addict needs you to play a role in their life script. You're not valued for who you are. You're valued for how you make them look or feel. You might be the successful friend who makes them look well-connected, the attractive friend who enhances their image, or the troubled friend who makes them feel superior and helpful. Jung understood that this type of relationship is fundamentally dehumanizing because it treats people as objects rather than subjects. You cease to be a real person with genuine needs, feelings, and complexities. Instead, you become a prop in their psychological theater. Here's how to recognize this pattern. Pay attention to how deep your conversations go. Can you share your real struggles, your doubts, your authentic feelings? Or do they become uncomfortable when you move beyond surface-level topics? The persona addict prefers relationships that stay safely superficial because depth threatens the illusion they're maintaining. Notice how they respond to your authentic self. When you show vulnerability, make mistakes, or reveal imperfections, do they accept these as normal human experiences? Or do they become uncomfortable, judgmental, or distant? The persona addict needs everyone around them to maintain the same level of artificial perfection they demand from themselves. Also observe their relationship with image and appearance. Are they obsessed with social media presentation? Do they constantly talk about how things look to others? Are they more concerned with appearing happy than actually being happy? This obsession with image often extends to their expectations of you. Jung would also have you notice their emotional range. Authentic people experience the full spectrum of human emotion: joy, sadness, anger, fear, excitement, disappointment. But persona addicts typically show a very narrow emotional range, usually staying within socially acceptable feelings. They may seem perpetually upbeat, constantly busy, or always fine. The most telling sign is their response to authenticity in others. When someone else shows genuine emotion, makes a real mistake, or struggles with something difficult, the persona addict often becomes judgmental or uncomfortable. They may make comments about how that person should handle things differently or shouldn't feel certain ways. The unconscious manipulator, the guilt tripper. The fourth type Jung would have you recognize is the unconscious manipulator, someone who has learned to control others through emotional manipulation, but who is largely unaware of what they're doing. Jung understood that manipulation doesn't always come from conscious malice. It often comes from unconscious patterns learned in childhood as survival mechanisms. This person has an arsenal of emotional manipulation tactics: guilt trips, passive aggression, emotional blackmail, victim playing, and silent treatments. But here's what makes them so dangerous. They often genuinely believe they're the one being mistreated. Their manipulation feels justified to them because they've convinced themselves that you're the problem. Jung would help you understand that these manipulation tactics are actually unconscious attempts to control the emotional environment. The unconscious manipulator learned early in life that direct communication doesn't work, but emotional manipulation does. So they've developed sophisticated strategies for getting their needs met indirectly. The guilt trip is their favorite weapon. They'll make you feel responsible for their emotions, their problems, their happiness. Phrases like, "After everything I've done for you, I guess I'm just a bad friend," or "Fine, don't worry about me," are designed to make you feel guilty for having boundaries or needs of your own. They're masters of passive aggression. Instead of directly expressing anger or disappointment, they'll use sarcasm, silent treatments, or indirect comments. They'll agree to things they don't want to do, then punish you for making them do it. They'll say they're fine when they're clearly not, then get angry when you don't read their mind. Here's how Jung would have you identify this pattern. Pay attention to how you feel after interactions with this person. Do you often feel guilty, confused, or responsible for their emotional state? Healthy relationships don't leave you constantly questioning whether you've done something wrong. Notice their communication style. Do they express their needs and feelings directly, or do they expect you to guess what they want? Unconscious manipulators rarely ask for things directly because that would require taking responsibility for their needs. Instead, they hint, sulk, or create situations where you feel obligated to offer what they want. Observe their relationship with boundaries. When you set a boundary, say no to a request, express a need of your own, or prioritize something else, how do they respond? Healthy people might be disappointed, but will respect your autonomy. Unconscious manipulators will make you pay emotionally for your boundaries. Jung understood that these people often learned manipulation as children in dysfunctional environments where direct communication was unsafe or ineffective. This understanding can help you have compassion for them while still protecting yourself from their unconscious patterns. The projection screen, the idealizer, devaluer. The fifth type Jung would warn you about is the projection screen, someone who doesn't see you as you actually are, but as a screen onto which they project their own psychological contents. This person swings between idealizing you and devaluing you, and both extremes are equally problematic because neither involves seeing your authentic self. Jung understood that projection is a normal psychological function, but when it becomes extreme, it creates relationships based on fantasy rather than reality. The projection screen doesn't really know you. They know their idea of you, which changes based on their internal psychological state. During the idealization phase, you can do no wrong. They put you on a pedestal, praise you excessively, and see you as somehow special or superior. This feels good initially, but Jung would warn you that idealization is just as dehumanizing as criticism because it denies your full humanity. When the inevitable devaluation comes, and it always comes, you're suddenly terrible, disappointing, or inadequate. The same qualities they once praised become sources of criticism. This isn't based on anything you've actually done. It's based on their internal psychological shifts. Jung called this the divine child-taught terrible mother split, the inability to see others as complex, flawed, complete human beings. Instead, people are either all good or all bad, depending on how well they're fulfilling the projector's unconscious psychological needs. Here's how to recognize this pattern. Notice the intensity and unrealistic nature of their initial enthusiasm about your friendship. Are they immediately telling you how amazing you are, how you're different from everyone else, how perfectly you understand them? This intensity is a red flag because genuine appreciation builds gradually as people get to know you. Pay attention to their emotional stability in the relationship. Healthy friendships have ups and downs, but they're generally consistent. Projection screens have dramatic emotional swings that seem disproportionate to whatever actually happened between you. Observe how they talk about other people in their life. Do they describe past friends and relationships in extreme terms, either completely wonderful or completely terrible? This black and white thinking about others is usually a sign that they'll eventually apply the same pattern to you. Jung would also have you notice their interest in your actual inner life. Do they ask about your real thoughts, feelings, and experiences? Or are they more interested in how you reflect back their own psychological needs? Projection screens are often remarkably uninterested in who you actually are underneath their projections. The emotional terrorist, the drama creator. The sixth and final type Jung would have you recognize is the emotional terrorist, someone who creates emotional chaos and drama as a way of managing their own internal psychological instability. Jung understood that some people become addicted to emotional intensity because it makes them feel alive and gives them a sense of power and control. This person is always in the middle of some kind of emotional storm. They have explosive reactions to minor situations, create conflicts where none existed, and seem to thrive on emotional intensity. But what you need to understand is that this chaos serves a psychological function for them. It externalizes their internal turmoil and makes others responsible for managing their emotional state. The emotional terrorist has learned that creating drama gets them attention, sympathy, and control over others. When things are calm and peaceful, they feel anxious and empty, so they unconsciously create situations that generate the emotional intensity they crave, regardless of how this affects others. Jung would help you understand that this person's emotional reactivity isn't really about whatever they claim to be upset about. It's about their internal psychological state. They use external situations as excuses to discharge internal emotional pressure, and they expect others to absorb the impact of their emotional explosions. Here's how to recognize this pattern. Notice the frequency and intensity of their emotional reactions. Everyone has bad days and strong reactions sometimes, but emotional terrorists have them constantly. Their emotional responses are often disproportionate to whatever triggered them. Pay attention to their role in conflicts and drama. Are they often the common denominator in difficult situations? Do they have a history of falling out with friends, family members, or colleagues? While they'll always have explanations for why others were wrong or unfair, the pattern itself is telling. Observe how they handle calm periods. When things are peaceful and stable, do they seem content? Or do they seem restless, bored, or anxious? Emotional terrorists often unconsciously sabotage peaceful periods because they're addicted to emotional intensity. Notice their response to your emotional needs. When you need support or are going through something difficult, do they provide stability and comfort? Or do they somehow make it about them, escalate the drama, or become competitive about who has bigger problems? Jung understood that these people often grew up in chaotic environments where emotional intensity was the norm. They've never learned to tolerate peace and stability because it feels foreign and uncomfortable to them. The path to freedom. Jung's solution. Now that you understand these 6 types of psychologically toxic people, you might be wondering, what did Jung recommend for dealing with them? His solution was both radical and simple: individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole and autonomous. Jung understood that we attract and tolerate toxic people when we ourselves are unconscious of our own psychological patterns. The energy vampire targets people who have difficulty setting boundaries. The shadow projector attracts those who are insecure about their own worth. The persona addict draws in people who are also disconnected from their authentic selves. The path to freedom begins with self-awareness. Jung would have you ask yourself, what is it about me that attracts or tolerates this behavior? This isn't about blaming yourself for others' dysfunction. It's about taking responsibility for your own psychological development. Jung believed that healthy relationships are only possible between psychologically mature individuals. When you've done the work of integrating your own shadow, developing authentic self-worth, and creating strong boundaries, you naturally become less attractive to psychological predators and more attractive to healthy people. The process of individuation involves becoming conscious of your own projections, integrating your shadow material, and developing a strong sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation. When you know who you are and what you value, it becomes much easier to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate, control, or use you. Jung also emphasized the importance of trusting your instincts. Your body and emotions often recognize psychological toxicity before your rational mind does. If you consistently feel drained, anxious, or uncomfortable around someone, that's valuable information that shouldn't be ignored. The secret to identifying friends who are bad for you isn't about judging their character or declaring them good or evil. It's about recognizing unconscious psychological patterns that are harmful to your own development and well-being. Jung's gift to us is the understanding that psychological health is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Your mental and emotional energy is precious, and you have the right to protect it from people who would drain, manipulate, or exploit it, regardless of their conscious intentions. Remember, toxic people aren't necessarily bad people. They're often unconscious people acting out their own unresolved psychological material. You can have compassion for their struggles while still protecting yourself from their impact on your life. If this resonates with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own relationships, take action. Start setting boundaries. Begin the process of individuation. Trust your instincts about who feels good to be around and who doesn't. Share in the comments which of these types you've encountered and how Jung's insights have helped you understand your relationships differently. Your awareness might help someone else recognize their own situation. Your psychological well-being matters. Your growth matters. Your individuation matters. Don't sacrifice your mental health on the altar of being a good friend to people who are unconsciously toxic to your development. The journey towards psychological wholeness is challenging enough without carrying the unconscious burdens of others. Choose your companions wisely.